The coins in Florence did not buy the Medici their power. Their ledgers did. By the time a Florentine clerk first wrote the word debit across a page and balanced it with a credit, a new kind of empire was being built, quiet, invisible, and enormously fragile. What did it mean for one family to hold the trust of popes, princes, and merchants all at once? And what happens when politics begins to behave like bad debt? Stay with me. The answer is a ledger and a scandal you cannot ignore until the end. Florence, around the year 1400, smelled of wool dust, wet wood, and ink. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici moved his small bank to Florence in 1397, and, within a generation, his name meant more than a vault. The bank grew into a network of branches across Europe, and its position as the go-to manager of papal finances made the Medici not merely rich, but indispensable to the machinery of power. That was the miracle and the risk. The Medici were technicians of trust. They turned credit into a product. Their clerks practiced what would be written down for the public by Luca Pacioli in 1494, double-entry bookkeeping, the simple rule that every claim must have a counterclaim and every promise a record. That method let managers trace a missing coin like a fingerprint. It made the modern accounting world possible, and it allowed the Medici to run a far-flung business without constant, costly travel. Yet it also built a labyrinth where a false entry could hide a life-threatening hole. The bank's power was not only mechanical, it was political. Cosimo de' Medici handled papal finances and used the church's cash flows as both balance sheet and diplomatic tool. When your bank is the channel for tithes and papal commissions, your name becomes a kind of foreign policy. That proximity to power bought the family artists, palaces, and a voice in the city council. It also made them targets when politics turned sharp. For decades, the Medici did not look like a fragile house. They were an early multinational, with branches in London, Bruges, Lyon, and elsewhere, and managers who were meant to live by rules that contained risk inside each branch. The firm invented practical ways to move money without moving it physically. Bills of exchange, letters of credit, and partnership rules that limited liability in a single office. This was finance as engineering, and it produced astonishing reach. But reach can mask over-reliance. How do you run a network when one branch can leak into another? What if a branch manager falls in love with court patronage more than with prudence? The leak came not as a single earthquake, but as a series of bad seasons. In London, the bank tied itself to the politics of the cloth trade and to the loans a king could not always repay. By one reckoning, losses there reached some 51,533 gold florins before the branch was liquidated. In Bruges, a manager named Tommaso Portinari made choices that mixed vanity with dangerous lending, expensive galleys, excessive loans to Burgundian courts, and opaque accounting. When Piero inherited leadership and the political mood turned the Bruges and London bad debts together, would be counted in the tens of thousands. Some estimates put the total losses at upwards of 70,000 gold florins, and that number will sit like a stone in this story. Picture a scene. A dim room in Bruges, candles guttering, an accountant rifling through a ledger where entries look more like hopes than verifiable claims. A partner insists that the debt is a more partnership investment, while another partner knows the king will not, or cannot, pay. The argument ends with the same thing it begins with: a closed book and fingers crossed. What we feel in that room is the human cost of financial imagination, unmoored from discipline. There was a louder failure at home as well. The Medici had lent heavily to princes and generals, and not all of those notes returned. Francesco Sforza's debts, recorded as enormous sums in the books, strained branches that had to fund local operations by borrowing from Florence at ever higher rates. The system that had allowed the Medici to expand now required constant new infusions of liquidity. When those inflows dimmed, the same bookkeeping that had once been their strength made the scale of losses undeniable. One line at the end of a book could topple a city's credit. There is a small telling anecdote that captures the tone of the collapse. Tommaso Portinari once boasted, with the arrogance of a man who thought social climbing a business strategy, and Lorenzo later wrote of the great profits which are accruing to us through the management of Tommaso Portinari. The phrase stings because it reads like a ledger written by wish rather than fact. The line reads like hubris, and it would be cited in memoranda as the bank unraveled. The unspooling culminated when politics moved faster than accounting. In 1494, the family was expelled from Florence amid a populist backlash, and the moral force of preachers who painted their wealth as moral rot. Without political shelter, and with branches bleeding, the formal structure of the Medici Bank could not be sustained. The legal closure and liquidation that followed were less a dramatic single day than a decade of decline made visible. The empire of ledgers had been overwhelmed by the very politics it once manipulated. Pause here and ask a modern question. What is the equivalent today of a branch that borrows to cover operating shortfalls and then lends to princes who might default? Think of shadow banks that use short-term funding to finance long-term assets, or of institutions that grow politically entangled while their risk controls atrophy. The pattern repeats. Size creates temptation, and temptation births complacency.